Hello and welcome to Planted Nutrition. My name is Luke, I'm a nutritionist, and in this video we're reacting to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Make America Healthy Again. First of all, I just want to start this video by saying I'm not American and I want to detach this from politics. I'm only going to be discussing his ideas and potential changes that he wants to make related to nutrition. I'm aware there is a whole host of other things as well, but to keep this video short and simple, I'm going to just keep it on nutrition today. There's some really interesting stuff in here to do with health. First of all, how insane is it that someone is bringing so much attention and awareness to health, and especially the impact of nutrition on health? I know it's pretty controversial these days to talk about this, but as a nutritionist, I'm a massive advocate for nutrition for health. It's one of the most important things we can do, changing our diet and the food that we eat, to impact literally all of these aspects of our health: chronic disease, diabetes, heart disease, our risk of getting certain cancers, our brain health, our cognitive decline as we age, our inflammation, our ability to feel good, even our mental health, our ability to move, interact with other people, and have the energy to literally do our life, do our job, our career, spend times with family and loved ones. Everything comes back to what we nourish our body with. And so whether it's for good or for bad, the fact that we even have someone talking about this is really interesting in my opinion, because it is so important. But let's get a bit deeper into some of the key specific things that I've seen Robert F. Kennedy Jr. talk about in terms of nutrition and health. So the first one is he has talked about reducing corporate influence on the US dietary guidelines. Basically kind of talking about how these favor ultra processed foods over other options. And I mean, looking into the US dietary guidelines from the perspective of a nutritionist, they're all right. Like all dietary guidelines around the world, in my country of New Zealand as well, there is always some corporate influence, but I think we could all agree it's probably better that we don't have corporate influence on our dietary guidelines. We should have objective scientific viewpoints that aren't influenced by money or agendas from people that don't care about our health and just want to make money from us. And relating to that, he's talked about wanting to reduce processed food consumption in America. And this is really important because, and it isn't just in America, it's around the whole world now. Looking even in Europe, it might not be as bad as America. I'm in France right now. But America, UK, New Zealand, Australia, South America now, Asian countries, the whole world is affected by processed foods. And if there's one thing we know about nutrition, if there's one thing that everyone can agree on, is that we probably should be eating less processed foods. We don't want to be having refined processed carbohydrates and sugars, refined and processed oils, all of these additives and everything that are just not good for our health. There's so much research, and no matter who you talk to in the nutrition space, the people on the either most extreme ends of the spectrum, we can all agree processed foods are not the key to good health. And there's different statistics looking at it, but probably between about 60 to 90%, depending on the source, of an American diet is based around processed foods. And around the whole world, we need big shifts away from processed food consumption. I think it's really great that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is talking about this and bringing attention to this issue, because it's one of the biggest and most important things we can do on a country scale in America or on a global scale to improve the health of everyone. And number two that I've seen him talk about is limiting the ability of people to use the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, as well as having in school lunches processed foods. And again, this is absolutely related to what we were just talking about. Processed foods are linked to obesity, diabetes, higher rates of cancer, higher rates of heart disease, all of these chronic diseases that are plaguing the population, that are literally taking away our loved ones, their lives, they're stopping people from being able to live. And it's incredibly sad. And I know in America, because of the corporate influence on things like school lunches, you can have a processed pizza with white dough, processed salami meat, processed cheese, and tomato sauce, and that tomato sauce is counting as a serving of vegetables. I think we can all agree that that is not okay. So again, I don't know how this is going to play out, but I think it's really interesting that he's talking about this, and definitely shifting our diets away from ultra processed foods is a massive win for health. So number 3, and I find this one a bit weird considering what we've just talked about, and that is promoting things like beef tallow over seed oils. And seed oils is kind of this like term that has become popularized. It's like a trend on social media these days, but it's more kind of vegetable oils because not all of them really do come from seeds even. But these are kind of like processed oils from plants that are used in processed foods. And we've just talked about processed foods are not healthy, and we all need to be doing our best to be eating more whole foods. So he's talking about changing the fat in processed food from things like sunflower oil, canola oil, soybean oil to beef tallow. And in my opinion, is this going to have a big change on public health? I would say no, not at all, because it doesn't necessarily matter what sort of fat we're eating in our sugary donuts. We just don't want to be basing our diet around these foods at all. And this whole conversation around seed oils, people are like, wow, I felt so much better when I stopped eating seed oils. Amazing, that's so good, because you stopped eating processed foods. And whether it's the seed oils, whether it's the high amount of sugar, the refined carbohydrate, the pesticide or herbicide residues that are in these industrial agriculture foods, the artificial sweeteners, the artificial colors, or whether it's a combination of all of these things, I don't think that cooking our McDonald's fries in beef tallow instead of soybean oil is going to be a big win for public health. So I find this one a little weird. I feel like it's kind of just jumping on that seed oil trend and like, yo, seed oils, they're awful, so let's change them. But it's like, it doesn't necessarily even matter what sort of oil. Even if you're having the healthiest oil, something like olive oil, for example, in your processed food, it's still processed food, which we want to be moving away from. And if you want to learn more about the healthiest oil, I have a video about that, which you can check out in the annotation, wherever that is. And number 4 is he's talked about focusing on regenerative agriculture. And this is something that I find super interesting. I think we can all agree that factory farming is absolutely horrible, especially in countries like America, because people eat so much meat. There exists this system where huge amounts of input crops are grown, so things like corn and soybeans, and they're often GMO, so they're sprayed with huge amounts of pesticides, herbicides, artificial fertilizers. A lot of that runs off into rivers and creates this process called eutrophication, where there's so many nutrients in the water now that all of these toxic algae and things start to grow. It uses up all the oxygen. No more animals can live, creates things called dead zones in the oceans. And then we have all of the problems with factory farming, like obviously the awful suffering of billions of animals. It is completely horrible, as well as the creation of diseases like swine flu, bird flu, from all of these animals being so closely packed together in unsanitary conditions. Surely, regenerative agriculture is a good solution. And I have to say, obviously, it's probably better than factory farming. We like the idea of cows running around in green pastures, eating fresh grass, and they're just so happy and they've had such a good life, and then we get to eat them. But the thing with industrial agriculture is, despite how awful it is, it's rather efficient at creating meat products, as awful as that is to say. And regenerative agriculture that's using like grazing, it takes a lot more land to produce the same amount of meat. In order to meet the demands for meat, there'll need to be a lot more land being grazed, and the US has a lot of land, that's for sure, but we can't graze everywhere. There's areas that are naturally desert, for example. And while potentially some areas can be used and potentially even be improved by grazing, it kind of comes back to this thing of like, we all probably need to be eating less meat anyway, and For that, I'm a fan of regenerative agriculture because it is doing better potentially, and by nature it can't produce as much. It's going to make meat more expensive. Just like for our ancestors, not that long ago, 100 years ago, meat was a treat. If you wanted to eat meat, you went out and you killed your own chicken, or you went to the butcher once a week and you got your cut of meat because it was expensive and it wasn't available like it is today. And we probably need to go back to something more like that. And I'm also interested in technologies like cell-based agriculture, which is where they can like grow meat just using the cells of animals. And this is something that's super interesting as that technology matures. Is that going to replace a lot of the meat supply? There's experts that say yes, it will, and that actually the animal agriculture industry is going to be completely crippled in the next 10 to 20 years because of this. Because imagine if we have meat that we can produce at scale that uses 90% less resources. And if there are people that really want to eat traditionally grown meat, maybe you will be able to do that with regenerative agriculture, but it's probably going to be a lot more expensive and it's not going to be available to everyone. So when we have people like Joe Rogan and Elon Musk being like, yo, I love eating my steak and eggs for breakfast, it's chill if you've got $1 billion or hundreds of millions of dollars. Not that you need that much, but that you can afford to eat that way. But for the large majority of people, if we switch to a regenerative system, meat probably will be less available and more expensive. So that's something to be aware of. And we also have things like in my country of New Zealand, where a lot of this grass-fed happy beef comes from in America. New Zealand has huge problems with pollution, with all of these things I've talked about, eutrophication, damage of rivers. It has this clean, green New Zealand image that's promoted online for tourism, but New Zealand is largely not that clean or green. A lot of places you can't swim because they're too polluted. There's dead zones in the ocean around New Zealand as well. So I just like to bring all of these things to your attention when we're thinking about regenerative agriculture, because it's really easy to say that it's a great solution. And while it might be better in some respects, and it's amazing that there are people that are trying to do better, it's also probably because there's so many people in the world, it just can't support the population eating meat at the levels that we do. So we need other solutions as well. Whether that's things like cell-based agriculture and also shifting towards more plant-based diets, like what people used to eat in the past. And not shifting to eating more processed foods, because that is the problem. So all of these issues are incredibly important. And while I don't know a lot about Robert F. Kennedy as a person, and I'm taking all of the politics out of this discussion, if we just look at the ideas themselves, I think there's a lot of merit behind a lot of these ideas relating to nutrition. Obviously, we need to make big shifts in what we're doing because it is not working. People are sicker than they've ever been before. Our planet is also being hugely damaged by these systems that we currently employ, and there's billions and billions of animals that are living and suffering in awful conditions as well because of this. We need to make changes. Even if these aren't perfect changes, I think they're massive steps in the right direction. It's amazing to even have someone bringing so much awareness and public opinion around these issues. For those of you who know more about the situation, you'll have to let me know what you think in the comments down below. Was I on point? Was I right about this? Or was I completely wrong? Is it all terrible and there's no saving anything? Regardless, I think these are really interesting issues that deserve to be talked about. So thank you for your interest in nutrition and sticking around for this video. I wish you all the best with your health. And until the next time, stay healthy, my friends. And if you're looking for the next video to watch, check out this one, wherever it is, about the healthiest oil to cook with that I recommend and use in my own cooking.